The true account of the life of Jesus of Nazareth has never been fully revealed to the world, neither in the accepted Gospels nor in the apocryphal writings, though a few scattered indications appear in certain commentaries by the early Church Fathers before the Council of Nicaea. The realities concerning his identity and purpose remain among the most guarded mysteries, preserved even now within hidden repositories associated with secret brotherhoods. A portion of this unusual narrative was disclosed to a select number of the Knights Templars, who had been initiated into the deeper teachings of groups such as the Druzes, Nazarenes, Essenes, Johannites, and other sects dwelling in remote and largely inaccessible regions of the Holy Land. The understanding held by the Templars regarding the origins of Christianity was likely a significant cause of their persecution and eventual destruction. The contradictions found in the writings of the early Church Fathers are not only impossible to reconcile, but also clearly show that even within the first 5 centuries after Christ, these scholars relied on little more than tradition and hearsay as the foundation of their accounts. For those who accept without question, no difficulty arises, yet the person who seeks truth without bias encounters numerous uncertainties, of which several examples may be considered. According to common belief, Jesus was crucified in the 33rd year of his life, during the 3rd year of his ministry following his baptism. Around the year 180 after Christ, Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons and a leading theologian of the early Church, composed a work titled Against Heresies, directed against Gnostic teachings. In this text, he asserted, claiming authority from the apostles themselves, that Jesus lived into advanced age. He argued that those who claimed Jesus preached for only a single year before suffering misunderstood the meaning of the acceptable year of the Lord, and in doing so diminished both the extent of his work and the dignity of his maturity as a teacher. He reasoned that it would be impossible for Jesus to have instructed disciples without having first attained the age appropriate to a master. At the time of his baptism, Jesus had not yet completed his 30th year, but was approaching it, as described in the Gospel of Luke. If one were to accept that his ministry lasted only a year, then his death would have occurred while he was still a young man, far from the age associated with full authority and wisdom. Irenaeus further explained that the early stage of life extends through the 30th year and continues toward the 40th, while from the 40th to the 50th year a man begins to incline toward older age. He maintained that Jesus reached this more mature period while continuing his role as a teacher, a view supported, he claimed, by the Gospel accounts and by the testimony of elders. These elders included those in Asia who had known John, the disciple of the Lord, and who reported that John had conveyed this information to them. John himself was said to have remained among them until the time of the Emperor Trajan. Some individuals, Irenaeus added, had not only seen John but also other apostles, and had heard the same account directly from them, affirming its truth. He then questioned whether it was more reasonable to trust such witnesses, or instead to accept the views of later figures who had never encountered the apostles nor possessed any direct connection to them. In reflecting upon this passage, it is observed that it has, by chance, escaped alteration by those who sought to harmonize the gospel narratives by removing conflicting statements. It is also noted that the doctrine of the crucifixion was a subject of dispute among Christians even during the 2nd century. The testimony attributed to Irenaeus is regarded as highly significant, and, when considered through the principles of careful analysis and probability, stands as difficult to challenge. It should also be observed that Irenaeus composed his statement in order to oppose another view that was circulating in his time, namely that the ministry of Jesus lasted only a single year. Among the early Church Fathers, Irenaeus, who wrote within 80 years following the death of St. John the Evangelist, would reasonably be expected to possess reliable information. If the disciples themselves affirmed that Jesus lived to advanced age in the body, the question arises as to why the number 33 has been selected to represent the length of his life. This raises further speculation as to whether the events of his life were intentionally arranged to correspond more closely with the established patterns of earlier savior gods. That such parallels were recognized and even employed as a means of influencing Greek and Roman audiences is evident in the writings of Justin Martyr, another authority of the 2nd century. In his Apology, he addresses pagan readers by explaining that the teachings concerning the Word, the divine birth, the crucifixion, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ were not fundamentally different from beliefs already held about the sons of Jupiter. He further suggests that even the concept of divine generation without ordinary means, or the suffering of a divine figure, had precedence within their own traditions, thereby placing these ideas on familiar ground. From this, it becomes clear that the earliest missionaries of the Christian Church were more inclined to acknowledge similarities between their doctrines and those of pagan traditions than were later generations, who tended to distance Christianity from such associations. In attempting to resolve some of the uncertainties involved in constructing an accurate account of the life of Jesus, it has been proposed that more than one religious teacher bearing the name Jesus, or its variants, may have lived in Syria during that period, and that elements of their lives may have been combined within the Gospel narratives. In a work concerning secret sects of Syria and Lebanon, Bernard H. Springett, a Masonic writer, cites an early source whose title he could not disclose due to its connection with a sectarian ritual. The passage he provides describes how the lineage of the Essenes was preserved through holiness and devotion across many generations. It recounts that, by divine command, a spiritual messenger appeared to establish a successor to the voice of Jehovah. After 4 generations, a child named Joshua was born to Joseph and Mora, devout followers who remained apart from others except the Essenes. This Joshua, living in Nazareth, is said to have restored the worship of Jehovah and revived lost rites and ceremonies. In the 36th year of his life, he was reportedly stoned to death in Jerusalem. In more recent centuries, numerous works have appeared attempting to expand upon the limited descriptions of Jesus and his ministry found in the Gospels. Some of these accounts claim to be based on ancient manuscripts only recently brought to light, while others assert origins in direct spiritual revelation. Certain of these writings present ideas that seem plausible, while others are difficult to accept. Persistent traditions suggest that Jesus may have traveled to and studied in regions such as Greece and India, and that a coin was even struck in his honor in India during the 1st century. Records associated with early Christianity are also believed to exist in Tibet, and it is said that monks in a Buddhist monastery in Ceylon preserve accounts indicating that Jesus once lived among them and became acquainted with their philosophical teachings. Although early Christianity bears clear signs of Oriental influence, this is a matter the modern Church has largely avoided addressing. Should it ever be conclusively demonstrated that Jesus was an initiate of the Greek or Asiatic mysteries, the consequences for more conservative believers would likely be profound. If Jesus is accepted as God incarnate, as affirmed by formal church councils, it becomes significant that the New Testament describes him as called of God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. The phrase, after the order, suggests inclusion within a lineage, implying the existence of others of similar or even greater rank. If the Melchizedeks were regarded as divine or priestly rulers of humanity prior to the rise of temporal authority, then the statements attributed to St. Paul would indicate that Jesus was either among these philosophic elect or sought to restore their form of governance. It is also noteworthy that Melchizedek is said to have performed the same sacred act of sharing wine and bread later associated with the Last Supper. George Faber proposed that the original name of Jesus was Jeshua HaMessiah. Godfrey Higgins identified references in early Jewish commentaries indicating that the family of Joseph bore the surname Panther, noting accounts in which healing was performed in the name of Jesus, son of Panther. This association has been interpreted as linking Jesus symbolically with Bacchus, who was connected with panthers and often depicted in their company or riding in chariots drawn by them. The panther's skin also held ritual significance in certain Egyptian initiations. The monogram IHS, commonly understood as representing Jesus Savior of Men, has been traced to a Greek form whose numerical value is associated with the sun and was considered a sacred name of Bacchus. These parallels raise the possibility that early Roman Christianity may at times have been confused with Bacchic worship due to the striking similarities between the two traditions. If such a connection were established, it could clarify many otherwise puzzling elements within the New Testament. It is not unlikely that Jesus originally presented as allegory certain universal or cosmic principles that were later interpreted as literal events in his own life. The term Christos has long been understood to represent the solar power revered across ancient cultures. If Jesus described the nature and purpose of this force under the identity of Christos, giving it the form of a divine human figure, he would have been continuing a pattern established by earlier world teachers. This divine figure, endowed with the attributes of deity, represents the hidden divinity within every individual. Human beings achieve divine realization only through union with this inner self. Such union constitutes immortality, and the discovery of one's true self is therefore understood as salvation. The Christos, or divine presence within humanity, stands as the mediator between the absolute and the mortal condition. Just as figures such as Ates, Adonis, Bacchus, and Orpheus may have been enlightened individuals later confused with the symbolic forms they taught, so too has Jesus been identified with the Christos whose mysteries he proclaimed. Since this divine principle was believed to dwell within all beings, the primary task of the initiate was to awaken or resurrect this eternal presence within. One who achieved this realization was called a Christian, signifying one who had been united with the Christos. Among the most profound teachings of ancient philosophy was the idea of a universal Savior, whose nature elevates the souls of the regenerated. This concept is reflected in the statement attributed to Jesus that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that access to the Father is through him. In attempting to merge the historical Jesus with the universal Christos, later theologians constructed a doctrine that, to be properly understood, must be separated into its original elements. Within the Gospel narratives, Christos represents the perfected individual who, having passed through the stages of the great mystery symbolized by the 33 years, rises to a higher realm and reunites with the eternal source. The story of Jesus, as it now stands, resembles other symbolic traditions, such as the account of Hiram Abiff in Masonic teaching, suggesting that it may form part of an initiatory system rooted in early Christian and pagan mysteries. In the centuries leading up to the Christian era, the guarded teachings of the pagan mysteries gradually became accessible beyond their original circles. Students of comparative religion observed that these teachings were preserved by a small group of devoted philosophers and mystics, who clothed them in new symbolic forms under what came to be known as mystic Christianity. It is often suggested that the Essenes served as custodians of this knowledge and were responsible for the instruction and initiation of Jesus. If this is so, then it is likely that Jesus underwent initiation within the same tradition associated with the Temple of Melchizedek, where Pythagoras is said to have studied centuries earlier. The Essenes, regarded as one of the most prominent early Syrian sects, formed an order of devout men and women who lived disciplined and ascetic lives. Their days were devoted to simple labor, while their evenings were spent in prayer and contemplation. Josephus, the noted Jewish historian, spoke of them with great admiration, stating that they taught the immortality of the soul and placed high value on striving for the rewards of righteousness. He also observed that their manner of living surpassed that of others, as they devoted themselves entirely to agriculture. The name Essenes is thought to originate from an ancient Syrian term meaning physician, and they were believed to dedicate themselves to healing the ailments of mind, soul, and body. According to Edouard Schur, their principal centers were located in Egypt, near Lake Maures, and in Palestine at En-Gadi by the Dead Sea. While some traditions trace their origins to the schools of Samuel the prophet, many scholars consider them to have arisen from Egyptian or broader Oriental influences. Their practices of prayer, meditation, and fasting closely resembled those of spiritual practitioners in the East. Admission into the Essene order required a period of probation lasting 1 year, and like many mystery schools, it was structured in 3 degrees, with only a small number of initiates advancing through all stages. The community itself was divided into 2 groups, one consisting of celibate members and the other of those who were married. The Essenes avoided commerce and urban trade, sustaining themselves instead through agriculture, the raising of sheep for wool, and crafts such as pottery and carpentry. In both the Gospels and certain apocryphal writings, Joseph, the father of Jesus, is described as a carpenter and a potter. In additional accounts, such as the apocryphal Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, the child Jesus is portrayed forming birds from clay, which came to life and flew when he clapped his hands. The Essenes were known as a well-educated group, and there are records suggesting they were sometimes chosen as tutors for the children of Roman officials in Syria. Because many of their members were skilled craftsmen, the order has been considered by some as a forerunner of later traditions such as Freemasonry. Their symbolic system included tools associated with building, reflecting their belief that they were engaged in constructing a spiritual and philosophical temple as a dwelling place for the living God. Like the Gnostics, the Essenes embraced the concept of emanation, and one of their central purposes was to reinterpret the Mosaic law through hidden spiritual principles preserved within their tradition. This suggests that they were connected with the teachings of the Kabbalah, and, like several other sects of the region, they anticipated the coming of a promised Messiah described in early sacred writings. It is often suggested that Joseph and Mary, the parents of Jesus, were associated with the Essene order. Joseph is described as being significantly older than Mary, and according to certain early texts, he was a widower with grown sons, referring to Mary as a child younger than his own grandchildren. From her earliest years, Mary was dedicated to the service of the Lord, and various apocryphal accounts describe extraordinary events connected with her childhood. When she reached the age of 12, the priests deliberated concerning her future. The high priest, wearing the sacred breastplate, entered the Holy of Holies, where he received instruction from an angel. He was told to summon the widowers of the people and have each bring a rod, with a sign of divine selection determining her future husband. Joseph gathered the rods and entrusted them to the priests. His rod, however, was shorter than the others and was overlooked, remaining within the Holy of Holies while the rest were returned. When no sign appeared, Joseph, considering his advanced age, did not seek its return. At that moment, the high priest was instructed to retrieve the unnoticed rod. As it was placed in Joseph's hand, a white dove emerged from it and settled upon his head, marking him as the chosen guardian of the child. The editor of the sacred books and early literature of the East draws attention to the unusual tone with which the childhood of Jesus is portrayed in many apocryphal writings of the New Testament, especially in a work attributed to the doubting Thomas, whose earliest known Greek version dates from about the year 200 after Christ. In this account, the child Christ is depicted in a troubling manner, almost like a mischievous spirit, cursing or destroying those who provoke him. This text, designed to evoke fear and awe, gained popularity during the Middle Ages, as it reflected the harsh and punitive spirit characteristic of that period of Christianity. Like other early religious writings, the book attributed to Thomas appears to have been composed for two related purposes: to rival pagan traditions in displays of miraculous power, and to instill in non-believers a profound fear of divine authority. Such apocryphal accounts, however, lack any reliable foundation in fact. What were once considered powerful affirmations of faith through miracles have, over time, become sources of difficulty, as supernatural elements once inserted to impress the uncritical have, in more discerning ages, led to doubt and rejection. In another apocryphal text, the Greek Gospel of Nicodemus, it is recorded that when Jesus was brought before Pilate, the standards carried by the Roman guards bowed in reverence, despite the soldiers' efforts to prevent it. Similarly, in the letters of Pilate, it is stated that Caesar, angered by the execution of a just man, condemned Pilate to death by beheading. According to this account, Pilate prayed for forgiveness and was visited by an angel who assured him that his name would be remembered throughout Christendom, and that when Christ returned to judge humanity, Pilate would stand as a witness before him. Accounts such as these illustrate the layers of legend that have gradually attached themselves to the structure of Christianity over the centuries. The general population has often acted as both guardian and preserver of these traditions, resisting attempts to remove or question them. While such stories may contain fragments of truth, they are frequently exaggerated or distorted. The broader themes may hold meaning, but the details are often unreliable. Truth, like beauty, is often most complete when left unembellished. Beneath the veil of imaginative narratives, the perceptive observer may discern a profound and noble teaching, brought forth by a figure of great spiritual stature. Joseph and Mary are described as devout individuals dedicated to divine service, inspired by the expectation of a coming Messiah for the people of Israel. In accordance with the guidance of the Essene high priest, they prepared a body for the incarnation of a great soul, In this sense, the term Immaculate Conception is understood to signify purity rather than a supernatural event. Jesus was raised and instructed within the Essene tradition and later initiated into its deeper mysteries. As with other initiates, he is said to have journeyed eastward, and the unrecorded years of his life were likely devoted to the study of sacred teachings that he would later share. After completing the ascetic disciplines of his order, he attained what is described as the christening, a state of unity with his spiritual origin. Having achieved this realization, he began his mission, gathering disciples and imparting to them teachings that had been partially lost within the religious traditions of Israel. His ultimate fate remains uncertain, though it is likely that he encountered opposition and persecution, as is common for those who seek to transform established systems of thought and belief. To the general public, Jesus spoke in parables, while to his disciples he conveyed deeper truths, often still in symbolic form but with greater philosophical depth. It has been suggested that Plato, as an early teacher of the Christos concept, contributed significantly to the ideas later associated with Christianity. Jesus taught that the material world is governed by a great spiritual intelligence, formed according to the will of the Eternal Father. This intelligence represents both the mind of the world and the source of worldly thought. To prevent humanity from being consumed by material existence, the Eternal Father sent forth the highest expression of divine consciousness, the divine mind. This divine mind offered itself as a living sacrifice, becoming distributed throughout creation. Through a sacred act symbolized as a spiritual sharing, it became part of all living beings. Humanity was thus given the means to transcend mortality by aligning with this inner divine presence. Those who elevated their awareness to unite with this divine mind attained righteousness, and through this attainment, the divine mind within them was liberated and returned to its original source in glory. Because of this revelation, the disciples came to recognize in their teacher the embodiment of this very divine mind, perceiving him not merely as a messenger, but as the living expression of the truth he taught. According to tradition, the body of the Christos, understood as the spiritual law, was entrusted to the care of two men briefly mentioned in the Gospels, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Both were devout individuals who, though not counted among the disciples or apostles, were chosen as guardians of the sacred remains. Joseph of Arimathea is described as one of the initiated brethren and has been referred to as the first bishop of Christendom. Just as the visible authority of the Church is traditionally associated with Saint Peter, so the invisible and spiritual dimension of the faith was said to be preserved through a hidden lineage, sometimes called the secret church of the Holy Grail. This lineage was believed to descend from Joseph of Arimathea, to whom were entrusted enduring symbols of the covenant, including the ever-flowing cup and the bleeding spear. Following the guidance attributed to Saint Philip, Joseph of Arimathea is said to have journeyed to Britain, carrying these sacred relics and enduring many hardships along the way. There he was granted land upon which he established a place of worship, later known as Glastonbury Abbey. It is told that he planted his staff into the ground, where it took root and grew into a thorn tree that blossomed twice each year, becoming known as the Glastonbury thorn. The circumstances surrounding his death remain uncertain. Some traditions suggest he was taken from the earth in a manner similar to Enoch, while others hold that he was buried at the abbey. Throughout history, many have sought the Holy Grail, believed by some to be hidden within a crypt beneath that ancient site. Although a chalice discovered at Glastonbury has been regarded by the devout as the original Grail, critical examination offers little support for such claims. Like other relics, its significance lies more in tradition than in verifiable proof, especially considering how little was definitively known about the Christian mysteries in earlier centuries. The origins of the Grail legend, like many aspects of this broader tradition, remain difficult to trace with certainty. Elements of the story appear in the folklore of the British Isles, where tales of magical vessels, such as cauldrons, cups, and horns, are common. Early descriptions portray the Grail as a vessel of endless abundance, providing sustenance without limit and ensuring that those who partook of it would neither hunger nor thirst. One tradition even suggests that a person who beheld the cup could not die for a period of 8 days, regardless of illness. Some interpretations connect the Grail to sacred vessels used in the rites of figures, such as Adonis and Attis. Chalices also held significance in various ancient mysteries, and Bacchus was frequently represented through symbols such as cups or urns. Within nature-based traditions, the ever-flowing Grail came to represent the fertility of the earth and the sustaining power of the harvest, much like a source that could never be exhausted. In light of these parallels, it would be misleading to attribute the symbolism of the Grail solely to Christian origins, as it reflects a much older and more universal tradition. Within the Arthurian Cycle appears the enigmatic figure of Merlin, the magician. One legend relates that when Jesus was sent to free the world from the bondage of evil, the adversary resolved to counter this mission by bringing forth an Antichrist. To accomplish this, the devil, taking the form of a dreadful dragon, overshadowed a young woman who had sought refuge in a sacred place after the destruction of her family. From this union, Merlin was born, inheriting traits from both his human mother and his demonic father. Yet Merlin did not align himself with darkness. Instead, he turned toward the light and retained only certain extraordinary abilities attributed to his origin, namely prophecy and the working of miracles. The account of his infernal parentage is best understood symbolically, indicating that he was a philosophical son of the serpent or dragon, a designation applied to initiates of the mysteries, who regarded nature as their earthly mother and wisdom, symbolized by the serpent as their eternal father. The association of the serpent or dragon with evil arose largely from misinterpretations of early scriptural traditions. As an infant, Arthur was entrusted to Merlin, who became his guardian and instructor. During his youth, Arthur was educated in secret teachings and likely initiated into profound aspects of natural magic. With Merlin's guidance, Arthur rose to prominence as a great military leader in Britain, a role that later traditions often equated with kingship. His authority was confirmed when he drew the sword of Branstock from the anvil, an act signifying divine right. Merlin further aided him in obtaining the sacred sword Excalibur from the Lady of the Lake. After Arthur established the Order of the Round Table, Merlin's purpose was considered complete. According to one account, he vanished into the air, continuing to exist as an unseen presence capable of communicating with humanity. Another tradition holds that he withdrew into a stone chamber, sealing himself within. It is believed that many stories originally connected with Charlemagne were later attributed to Arthur, who is chiefly remembered for founding the Order of the Round Table at Winchester. However, little reliable information survives concerning the ceremonies or initiatory practices associated with this order. In one legend, the Round Table possessed the remarkable ability to expand or contract, accommodating either a small gathering or a vast assembly as required. More commonly, the number of knights seated at the table is given as either 12 or 24. The number 12 corresponds to the signs of the zodiac and also to the apostles of Jesus. The identities and heraldic emblems of the knights were displayed upon their seats. When depicted as 24, the number reflects a division of each zodiacal sign into light and dark aspects, representing day and night. Since each sign rises for a period of 2 hours daily, the 24 knights symbolize the hours of the day, the elders described before the throne in Revelation, and the celestial beings associated with the divisions of time in ancient Persian belief. At the center of the table was placed a rose, symbolizing the passion of Jesus Christ and his resurrection, as suggested by the image of rising. There was also an empty seat known as the Siege Perilous, reserved for the one knight destined to succeed in the quest for the Holy Grail, and which no other could occupy without peril. In the figure of Arthur may be recognized another expression of the recurring cosmic myth. The Prince of Britain is identified with the sun, his knights correspond to the zodiac, and his radiant sword may symbolize either the sun's rays, by which he overcomes the forces of darkness, or the axis of the earth itself. The Round Table represents the universe, while the Siege Perilous signifies the throne of the perfected individual. In a more earthly interpretation, Arthur is understood as the Grand Master of a hidden brotherhood of Christian and Masonic mystics who called themselves knights. He attained this exalted rank through the symbolic act of drawing the sword, representing the spirit, from the anvil of base metals, signifying the overcoming of his lower nature. As often occurs, the historical figure of Arthur gradually became intertwined with the symbolic narratives of the order, until the distinction between fact and allegory was no longer clear. Following Arthur's death at the Battle of Camblin, the traditions associated with his mysteries came to an end. In symbolic language, he was carried away upon a dark vessel, an image later poetically described by Tennyson. His sword, Excalibur, was returned to the waters, representing a withdrawal into the eternal. These images together illustrate the descent of cosmic night at the close of a great cycle of manifestation. Historically, it is believed that Arthur's body was laid to rest at Glastonbury Abbey, a place closely connected with the mystical traditions of both the Grail and the Arthurian legends. The medieval Rosicrucians are thought to have preserved the deeper meanings of the Arthurian Cycle and the Grail tradition, incorporating much of this symbolism into their own teachings. Despite being one of the most direct symbolic expressions of the Christos mystery, the Grail legend has often been overlooked. The halos depicted around the heads of gods and saints in both pagan and Christian art signify not only their association with the light of the sun, but also the presence of a spiritual radiance emanating from within. When the halo is formed of straight rays, it reflects a solar meaning. When composed of curved lines, it suggests a lunar quality, and when both forms are combined, it represents a harmony of these two principles. The circular halo is associated with the sun and masculine attributes, while the elongated or almond-shaped form signifies lunar and feminine qualities. This same symbolism appears in the architectural designs of cathedrals, particularly in their circular and elongated windows. A detailed symbolic system is reflected in the design, color, and ornamentation of these halos. A simple golden circle is typically used to denote a recognized saint, while more elaborate forms surround figures such as God the Father and God the Son. These often include decorative crosses, such as those resembling the form associated with St. George, or adorned with floral or lily motifs, with 3 visible arms, each element contributing to a deeper symbolic meaning.